What do you think of when you imagine God? It's past time to expand the ways we think about God through personal story, theology, spirituality, and social justice. We will explore feminine metaphors and untapped language for God. Some familiar, some less well known, but all revelatory of a God who is more than we've been allowed to imagine. One thing is for sure: God is more.
What do you do when you walk in the door at home to the place where you live? Maybe you change into more comfortable clothing. Some people take off their shoes as soon as they walk in the door, or their coats. I've heard of some people who need to take off their pants as soon as they get home. I talked to a friend last week who changes into pajamas as soon as she can. Maybe you grab a drink or a snack. Think about Mr. Rogers coming into his house, taking off his shoes, changing his cardigan. We often have a routine around entering this space. I do boring stuff, like hanging up my coat and letting my dogs out of their crates. Or maybe another relevant question would be, what are things you can only do when you're home? And this is more a question about your state of being. How are you when you're at home? Now, you're probably more likely to just sprawl out on the couch to relax and watch television. You might tip your chair back at the dining room table, drink from the juice carton. Home is the place where you intuitively know the rules and the expectations. It's also a place where you let your guard down, where you're most comfortable being yourself. In our home, we make up silly songs and dances. My husband and my daughter like to pull out a guitar and a ukulele, and one will tap a beat on the side of their instrument while the other one strums and makes up rhymes on the spot. We're goofy here in a way that not many people get to see us. Silly dances, big hugs, cringy jokes. We're also more likely to lose our temper and yell or cry because we're sad. All of our emotions are more freely expressed here at home than anywhere else. Mallory Wyckoff, author of God Is, reflects on this idea of home. Home is the space where I get to be seen, to be known, to matter, where I may leave 1,000 times, but I'm received with open arms upon every return, where I glimpse what it might mean to be a human being instead of a human doing. Let's pause here for a chat question. What does home mean to you? Take a minute and think about it. Today we're continuing our series, God Is, based on the book of that name by Mallory Wyckoff. In this series, we've been looking at different metaphors for God to tackle the basic challenge that for most of us, our view of God is way too small. God is more than we can imagine. God's not just one thing, God is bigger. We began this series with a conversation on God being more than we've been led to believe. And then on Mother's Day, we explored how God is mother and midwife. Last week, we considered how God is mystery. This week, God is home. And next week, we'll wrap up the series with God is wisdom within. So this week, we're exploring the ways that God is home. And I think maybe the only way to do that really is to explore more fully the distinction between home and out there. Like maybe we think of home being safe in contrast to the world, which is dangerous. Home is where I can let my guard down because out there I have to maintain some self-protection. Home is where I can be super informal because out there I need to be put together. Home is where I can be unfiltered, but out there I need to use my filter. Home is my comfort zone, but out there can be risky. In our best case scenarios, home is the place where you experience physical and emotional safety. It's where you have a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being. It's where you have connection to your family, either because you live with them or maybe you have like reminders of them. You probably have reminders of where you've come from, sentimental mementos. And then the further you go from home, the less connected you are to that sense of safety, that sense of grounding. Memorial Day is a day that we remember and honor those who have died while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. And this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, is a time to remember people who have died serving in the armed forces, many in some kind of conflict. People who left home for all kinds of reasons and experienced hardship and violence and ultimately death. And people all over the world experience this reality when they join their country's armed forces. We know that there's violence, pain, grief, oppression out there that leads to loss and death. Out there for all of us is risky. The Apostle Paul describes the world out there in this way in his letter to the church in Rome. We know that from the beginning until now, all of creation has been groaning in one great act of giving birth. And not only creation, but all of us who possess the first fruits of the Spirit. We too groan inwardly as we wait for our bodies to be set free. Creation is groaning. Out there is groaning, and many of us are groaning with creation. We're groaning about various forms of injustice, and we're trying to work in meaningful ways to bring justice. We recognize all of the violence and oppression out there, and we want to be part of the change. And many of us have an urge to do this in unhealthy ways. We push ourselves to the extreme in service of a just cause, all while causing inestimable harm to our own souls. We know we want to be part of changing the world, and we sacrifice ourselves or our families to do that. I've met so many pastors who have the mindset that they should be available all the time. They have a hard time taking vacation, an even harder time prioritizing time to rest or time to be with their families. They sacrifice themselves and their families on the altar of ministry. But you don't have to be a pastor to experience this. Next to the stories of so many other people who are experiencing intense trauma or violence or unrest, we can start to feel like we have no right to claim hardship or pain, because whatever difficulties or griefs we face pale in comparison. And so we say to ourselves, claim my own trauma when the world endures traumas I could never imagine? No, I'll just keep that to myself, thanks. We become experts at diminishing what we feel. And we say to ourselves, yeah, whatever my experience, whatever my pain, it will never match that of others. So it just doesn't get to be as real. But that's not really how emotions work, and that's not really how pain works. Wyckoff reflects on her own experience of caring so much for the world at her own expense in this way. Our emotions are meant to be experienced, felt, honored, not stifled. So from an early age, mine just came out sideways. What I could not feel for myself, I felt for others 1,000 times over. I doubled down on holding compassion for everyone else, all the while refusing to offer any to the scared little girl within. Our emotions are meant to be experienced and honored, but she didn't feel free to do that. She was stuck comparing her pain to the pain out there. And then what she couldn't feel for herself, she felt for out there. Oof. I think she just described me. I think that's maybe part of why I threw myself into social justice causes. When I was a teenager, I became obsessed with IJM, the International Justice Mission. Their mission is to protect people living in poverty from being taken advantage of through trafficking and enslavement. I got on their prayer list and was reading about young girls who are being rescued from being trafficked. Some of them already mothers from said trafficking. I thought I wanted to work for IJM, either as a lawyer or a counselor, to participate in this mission. And at the same time, I was pretty checked out from my own pain and experiences. And with Wyckoff's words in my mind, I wonder if at least part of that urge in me to join IJM was me doubling down on holding compassion for everyone else, all the while refusing to offer any compassion to the scared little girl within me. But the answer here isn't to ignore what's happening out there. We're not trying to just hole up at home and never leave, never move past our comfort zones. We need to allow our imaginations to move us in a new direction, away from that dichotomy of out there versus at home. And the Old Testament provides such a vision for home. After rescuing the Israelites from enslavement in Egypt, enslavement, was out there, dangerous, not really home, God gives them a series of commands to order their new communal life in the Promised Land, the place which was now home for them. Before and during and after the commands are pronounced, God says, "Remember when you were slaves in Egypt." Here are a couple examples. "Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day." Always remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God redeemed you from your slavery. That is why I have given you this command. Now, that's not all of them, not even close. I had to choose a couple just to keep this simple. These commands were to guide their communal life, to create their home. Home being this new place where they live, but more importantly, the way that they were meant to live. Now, they never lived these commands out perfectly, but the intent was to create space, to create a life where everyone and everything had capacity to flourish. It's this refrain that reminds them of the oppression they had endured, lest they ever forget it. But it's also a call to build their new community in a way that wouldn't keep such injustice and cycle, so they couldn't shift from being oppressed to oppressor. There was enslavement, but here at home, there's going to be freedom. There was judgment, but here is justice. God knew that without healing and a new imagination, those who were oppressed would become oppressors. Without honoring and processing our own pain and emotions, we're bound to pass that pain on to others. The pain of out there would come home to stay. It's in these texts that we can begin to imagine another way of being, one that allows us to groan for the world's suffering, but also to groan for our own, where we can grieve the pain we've endured as this people process the grief of their enslavement, and also work to create new systems that correct current wrongs. This is a world where there's space enough for the tears of our neighbors and the tears we cry for ourselves. This is a rhythm of good, meaningful work to enact justice in the world and good, holy rest for my body and spirit. E.B. White said, "I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." Some days we feel energized to improve the world, energized by the work of improving the world, but some days we just feel weary. In my own home, I can choose my way of being. I can choose to deny my own experiences and suppress my feelings and diminish my pain, to run myself ragged and work myself into a breakdown, claiming that I'm just trying to take care of the world. Or I can choose instead to resist injustice with joy, to believe that every decision I make says yes to a certain vision of the world. Even the choice to honor my feelings and take that bubble bath. I don't know how to choose this way unless God is home. If God is not the very space in which I'm free to be a human who cares for the world and to receive the very same care, the space in which I can groan for the pain of others and be comforted in my own pain, that I am left with no other option but to be God. She's being almost sarcastic here. God has the job description of holding all of those things together. And if God's not holding the world in her hands, then it falls into ours. When God is home, God is the framework we exist in that provides this kind of freedom. God is the space, the place in which we can be free to be people who care about the pain of the world and about our own pain. We care about the needs of the world and we tend to our own needs. Let's pause here for another chat question. If God is home, what does that mean for your life? Take a minute and talk about it. Home is the space where I get to be seen, to be known, to matter, where I may leave 1,000 times, but I'm received with open arms upon every return, where I glimpse what it might mean to be a human being instead of a human doing. God is the space where we get to be seen, to be known, to matter, where we can leave 1,000 times but still be received with open arms upon every return. We've been talking about God, about home as a place where you can experience a certain way of being, but right now I want to focus more on the way of being. When God is home, we experience a new way of being. So think about the tension between home as a place and home as a state of being, using church as an analogy. When we have worship services in different locations, in the pub or at the diner, at Waldemar or Fenner, we're not in our buildings, but we're still Sycamore Creek. We're still church, just in a different location. And similarly, we can be home, but not in our house. When God is home, there are a few implications for us. Home becomes a state of being, not a location, which means for those who don't have permanent housing, God is still home. Home can be shared with other people. Home isn't a place where you isolate and are shielded from the rest of the world. Home can be shared with other people, and whatever rest you find there, you can extend that bubble in hospitality to others. Home is with us as we care for out there. We can move through the world with home inside us, caring for ourselves and out there. When God is home, we glimpse what it might mean to be human beings instead of human doings. Have you ever reflected on that distinction? Human being versus human doing? You don't have to do anything to be a human, you just are. You don't have to earn your love or your place at home. God is home. I imagine God is home with the comfy furniture, the kind of furniture you just want to curl up on to read your favorite book, with a space to eat that welcomes all kinds of guests and is perfect for an intimate family meal. God is home where you get the best sleep, the most deep rest with good pillows. God is home with the big table where people don't have to become smaller to fit in. When God says, you have a seat at this table, she doesn't mean just like, we can maybe kind of sort of fit a chair in at the end of the table. She means there's plenty of room for us to be fully present and fully ourselves, room for us to spread out and prop up our elbows and have second helpings and join in the conversation. Home is where all your strengths and weaknesses are seen and accounted for, where you depend on people and people depend on you. Home is where I know where things go, even if they don't make sense. Home is where I know how to work the shower and the laundry and the dishwasher and the coffee maker. When God is home and we find our belonging in her, when we find our sense of peace in her, our sense of rest and comfort in her, then we can go out there with confidence. We can move through the world centered. We can engage in the work of restoration and healing while tending to our own restoration and healing. Because God isn't one single place called home. God is home within us.